Welcome everyone to the introduction to Masechet Shevuot. Masechet Shevuot deals with oaths, and it appears in Seder Nezikin after Sanhedrin and after Makot, because many of the oaths that are discussed in this Masechet are related to legal procedure. So even though, as we'll see, there are some similarities between Shevuot, oaths, and between Nidarim, vows, which both have to do with creating a new reality through words, Nidarim appears in Seder Nashim, while Shevuot, which deals more specifically with the legal process, appears in Seder Nezikin. I'm going to share the screen so that you can see some of the verses that stand at the foundation of this Masechet. And I would highly recommend before you begin studying this Masechet to just take a few moments and read through chapter 5 of Leviticus. Because as we'll see, most of the Masechet is actually a development or a midrash on this chapter as a whole. So the chapter begins in the first half of the chapter, verses 1 through 13, by discussing a person who needs to bring a guilt offering. And the guilt offering needs to be brought in one of three different general situations. One, if a person has information about some legal matter and doesn't bring that testimony in order to support the plaintiff or sometimes the defendant, but generally the assumption will be to assist the plaintiff. The second situation is if a person became impure, became ritually impure, tameh, but didn't know that he or she was impure and therefore touched all kinds of objects or people, and after a certain amount of time discovered that he or she was actually ritually impure throughout this whole time. And the third situation is if a person took an oath about something, forgot that he had taken that oath, then violated the oath, and later realized his or her mistake. In all of these cases, a person needs to, first of all, confess about their sin, and then needs to bring a sacrifice, where the sacrifice is described in a threefold manner. Ideally, the person needs to bring an animal. If they do not have the financial means to bring a sheep or another animal, then they need to bring two turtle doves or two pigeons, shnei torim or shnei bnei yonah. And if they don't have the means for that, then they need to bring a certain amount of an ephah solet, a certain amount of flour. So this korban, which is described in the Torah as a kind of sliding scale, right? If you have the means, you bring a certain amount. If you don't, then you bring less. The rabbis included them all as one korban, which they called korban ole veyored, the sacrifice that increases and decreases, right, depending on your circumstances. Later on in the chapter, in verse 20, the chapter 5 discusses another kind of situation, a situation in which a person received a deposit from another person, and when the depositor returned to ask for their deposit, then the guardian, the warden who had received the deposit, takes an oath that they know nothing of the matter, but they're actually lying. Um, and if a person like this does something like this and later wants to fix what they've done, then again, they need to confess what they did. They need to return the deposit. In addition, they have a fine. They need to bring another chomesh, another 20% of the value of that deposit. And finally, they also need to bring a korban, a guilt offering, a korban Hashem. So this is the case whether it's a deposit or whether the person stole something or defrauded or found a found object. In all of these cases, if a person swore regarding something that has monetary value, that it belongs to him or to her, and then in retrospect wants to confess that actually it wasn't theirs, it was someone else's. They need to return the object, they need to pay the fine, and they need to bring a korban. So if we look at all of these verses together, they're basically the backbone of Masechet Shevuot. And Masechet Shevuot is divided into two central parts, we can say. The first two chapters focus on the actual korban. So they're actually derived from verses 2 and 3 in this chapter, where the Torah says, or when a person touches any impure thing, be it the carcass of an impure beast or the carcass of impure cattle or the carcass of an impure creeping thing, and the fact has escaped notice, and then being impure, that person realizes guilt, or when touches human impurity, and though having known about it, the fact has escaped notice, but later that person realizes guilt. Okay, so all of this has to do, these two verses have to do with impurity. And then in verse 4, the Torah turns to, or when a person utters an oath to bad or good purpose. So if we look at the Masechet, we can see that the Masechet actually follows this structure. And the first two chapters deal primarily with the issue of purity and impurity, and specifically bringing a korban ole veyored, bringing this specific kind of korban, which is described here again and again in this chapter, in the context of impurity, first of all, and then only later in chapter 3, the Masechet will turn to the main subject of the chapter, which is the subject of oaths. So in chapters 1 and 2, the focus is, as I said, on impurity. And the Masechet emphasizes that you only have to bring a korban ole veyored in a case that is as is described here in verse 3, when a person touches human impurity, and though having known about it, the fact has escaped notice, but later that person realizes guilt. So there's actually 3 stages here. First, a person needs to know that they're impure. In the second stage, he or she needs to forget that they're impure. And in stage 3, they need to recollect that they were impure before. And all 3 stages are required in order to be eligible to bring a korban. So if a person didn't know that he was impure, or didn't or knew originally that he was impure and then forgot about it and didn't remember afterwards, then he won't be able to bring the korban ole veyored. But the Mishnah describes how a different set of sacrifices, the sacrifices of Yom Kippur, actually atone for a person like this. In chapter 2, the Talmud discusses what happens when a person touches things in a state of impurity, and when they're not aware of this impurity. So this is called Tum'at Mikdash v'Kodashav. And again, this incurs bringing a korban ole veyored. So basically, we can look at 2 central categories. The first category is a person who ate kodesh, who ate something which has a holy status, or a person who entered the precincts of the mikdash. And the Talmud also discusses two different kinds of forgetting, that one is forgetting impurity. The first way is that a person doesn't know that they're impure and then eats the Kodesh or goes into the Mikdash without being aware that they shouldn't be doing this because they're actually impure. The second way is that a person knows that they're impure, but they don't know that what they're eating now has a holy status, a status of Kodesh, or they don't realize that they've entered the area of the Mikdash that you're not allowed to enter. So there's a whole matrix here between different ways of forgetting or being unaware, and different ways of creating a problematic situation. In chapter 3, we move to the central subject of the Masechet, which is oaths, Shevuot. And as we'll see and we'll detail now, there are actually 6 main kinds of oaths that are discussed in this Masechet, which can be divided into 3 groups, which are discussed in a pretty organized way in the Masechet. So the first group of oaths are oaths that a person takes upon his or herself. So it's a personal oath that I take of my own initiative. The second group of oaths are oaths that a person is sworn to take by another person. Okay, so we're going to see that a plaintiff can demand from certain either from the defendant or from third party witnesses to take an oath in certain circumstances. And the third category is oaths that it's not the individual takes upon himself, it's not the plaintiff demands, but it's the actual Beit Din that requires that these oaths be taken. So if we look at the first category, oaths that a person takes upon himself, these are discussed primarily in chapter 3. Chapter 3 discusses 2 different kinds of oaths. Shvuat habitui, what we could call an utterance oath, or we could just call it a personal oath, an oath that a person takes of their own initiative. This is an oath that, as we'll see in the first Mishnah of chapter 3, a person swears to do something in the future, or swears that they've already done something in the past. So we'll look for a moment at Mishnah Shevuot 3:1. Oaths are subdivided into 4. I swear that I shall eat, or I swear I shall not eat. Or I swear that I have eaten, and I swear that I have not eaten. Okay, so there's 4 different kinds of oaths that a person can take. And if they took this oath and then in retrospect it turns out to have been a false oath, it turns out that they lied, then there's a difference if they did it intentionally or unintentionally. If this was done unintentionally, then they receive the punishment of lashes, makot, which returns to our last Masechet. If it was beshogeg, unintentionally, then they bring korban ole veyored. Now, this idea of a shvuat bitui, of a person just uttering an oath and creating a new obligation that wasn't there before, right? I was allowed to eat, everything kosher. And now I took an oath that I will never again eat pretzels. And now I have a new isur, a new prohibition that's personal for me, right? So this kind of oath seems very similar to a neder, which we've already learned about in Masechet Nedarim. So what's actually the difference between a neder and a shvuah? Well, the difference between them actually maps onto a distinction, or perhaps is even the origin of this very famous distinction that interpreters, commentators from the tradition of Brisk often used to distinguish between other different categories in halacha. And this is a distinction between chefza and gavra, between the object and the person. So in a neder, in a vow, when a person takes a neder, it has to be related to a certain object. By contrast, when a person takes an oath, a shvuah, it has to be connected to the person's activity. Okay, so let's give an example. I can take a neder that I will not enjoy anything that has to do with a certain place, let's say a certain synagogue. Okay, that means that I can't sit on the chair in that synagogue. I can't go into the yard of that synagogue. I can't enjoy anything of that synagogue. But the focus is on the object, on the synagogue. By contrast, I can take an oath that that I will never go to that synagogue. Okay, so the outcome could be the same. The outcome of the neder and the shvuah could be the same, but the focus is different. In the neder, the focus is on the object, on the place in this case, and in a shvuah, the object is on my activity, okay, where I'm allowed to go to, where I'm not allowed to go to. Okay, so that's with respect to Shevuat Bitui, which is a central category in the Masechet. But chapter 3 also discusses another kind of Shevuah, Shevuat Shav, a false oath, which is a kind of oath where it is clear that something is untrue, is false. For example, the Talmud gives an example of someone who takes an oath that a column of marble is made of gold. So that's clear to everyone else that's around that it's not made of gold, it's made of marble. Another kind of Shvuat Shav can be something that is impossible, something that just cannot be. For example, if I swear that I've seen a pink zebra flying in the sky. Um, the category of Shevuat Shav can also be relevant to someone who takes an oath which stands in contradiction to a prior oath that he or she has already taken. And for this reason, okay, so you can't take two oaths that contradict one another. And for this reason, Shvuat Shav also applies to someone who takes an oath to cancel a mitzvah. For example, someone who swears not to do Netilat Lulav on Sukkot. And the Talmud explains that the mitzvot are actually something that is as though we've already sworn an oath to observe the mitzvot. It's called Mushba ve'omed mehar Sinai. And therefore, if I swear, if I take an oath to cancel a mitzvah, it's as if I'm taking an oath that's contradictory to an oath I already took. And therefore, I'm canceling out the second kind of the oath, and therefore I'll have to bring and therefore I'll have to be punished in this case. And the punishment in this case is again if it's on purpose, if it's b'mezid, then the punishment is lashes. However, in this case of a shvuat shav, if I accidentally took this oath, I didn't realize the ramifications of this oath, then I won't have to bring a korban and I won't have to incur lashes, but rather I'll be completely patur. So that's the first category of shvuot that a person takes upon his or herself. The second category is shvuot where one person forces another person to take the shvuah, to take the oath. And this is discussed in chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4 focuses on what's called Shvuat ha'edut, or the oath of testimony. In this case, a plaintiff demands of two witnesses to give testimony in court in a legal case that the plaintiff has against someone else, against the defendant. And the two witnesses who were there at the time that whatever the event was occurred refused to give testimony. And in order to strengthen their refusal, they take an oath that they have no relevant information. Now, what happens if in retrospect it turns out that they actually did have information and that they lied when they took that oath? Well, again, if they did it b'mezid, on purpose, then they have to bring a korban oleh veyored. If they did it unintentionally b'shogeg, then they don't have any punishment in this case. Now, obviously, these kinds of shvuot, these kinds of oaths will only be relevant to someone who is a kosher witness, right? Someone who is who can be a witness and uses the shvuah in order to avoid giving testimony. And another important thing to keep in mind is that this kind of shvuah is used only in monetary cases and not cases which have to do with personal status. Um, Shevuat Ha'edut, the oath of testimony, can only be used by the plaintiff who is requiring the witnesses to give testimony for something that already happened. Okay, so the plaintiff can't, grab two people and tell them, I'm making you swear to take an oath that you will testify for something that is about to happen. Okay, it only works for the past and not for the future, in contrast to Shvuat HaBitui, that a person can swear about something that happened in the past or can take upon himself something for the future. Another important discussion in this chapter will relate to how exactly does a person take an oath? What are the different names of God that can be used in an oath? And what will be the legal ramifications if a person uses different formulations of an oath and then turns out to have been lying? Chapter 5 discusses another kind of oath that one person coerces another person to take. And this is called Shvuat HaPikadon, which we might translate as an oath of deposit. And even though it's called an oath of deposit or a deposit oath, which seems to indicate that it's only relevant in the case where someone deposited a deposit, right? So someone gave a deposit to a shomer, to a guardian, and now the guardian is rejecting the plaintiff's claim and saying, no, you never gave me a picadon, you never gave me a deposit, or alternatively, you gave me a deposit, but I already returned it. So it seems like Shvuat HaPikadon would only be relevant in this case, but the truth is that deposit is just an example. And actually, this category is relevant for anyone who wants to object to a monetary claim that's being directed towards him. Okay, so whether it's someone's saying to me, you have my deposit and you didn't return it, or you have my loan and you didn't return it, or you found a lost object and you didn't return it, or you stole something from me. Okay, in each of these cases, I can take an oath that that I didn't create any monetary damages towards this other party. And if it turns out that I was lying when I took that oath, then I'm going to have to not only repay the monetary amount that I denied earlier, I'm also going to have to pay a fine of a chomesh of an extra 20% of the value. And I'll have to also bring a guilt offering to the mikdash. So that's the second category, the category of oaths where one party can force another party to take an oath. Finally, we have the third category of oath that the Beit Din is the one who requires them. And again, here we have two different kinds of oaths. We have Shvuat HaDayanim, the oath of the judge's oath, and Shevuot HaShomrim, the oath of the four different kinds of guardians. So chapters 6 and 7 discuss Shevuot HaDayanim, which are oaths that the Beit Din requires from the defendant in some kind of monetary disagreement, and occasionally also from the plaintiff. Um, this kind of oath functions very similarly to Shvuat Pikadon, right? That one party is demanding basically from another party to take an oath. But there's one central difference. In Shvuat Pikadon, the person who takes the oath, so the defendant, um, is denying all of the claims against him. Okay, so if someone comes to me and says, I gave you a deposit, and I say, what are you talking about? You never gave me a deposit. You must be confused. It must be someone else. And then I can take an oath in order to reject that claim. Okay, so I'm rejecting the entire claim. By contrast, the discussion in chapter 6 focuses on cases where the defendant is modeh b'miktzata te'ana. So he's admitting a certain portion of the claim against him. Okay, so for instance, in the case of a pikadon, it would be if I would say, yeah, you did give me the pikadon, but I already returned half of it. Okay, so I'm not denying the claim in its entirety. I'm admitting part of it, but I'm saying I did return part of the money already. Or even just if I would agree, yes, you did give me the money, but I repaid it already. Okay, that's also would be a modeh b'miktzata te'ana. And in this case, the judges can make me take an oath that that I don't need to return the rest of the money. Okay, so if I say you did give me you gave me the money, I returned it already, then the Beit Hadin can make me take an oath in this case. Similarly, Shvuat Dayanim can also be used in another problematic case, which is kind of a intermediate case, we might say. Ideally, witness testimony, which we discussed earlier, is two witnesses, right? That's considered valid testimony in halacha. But what happens if if the plaintiff wants to call one witness who was at the scene of the crime or at the scene of the disagreement between the plaintiff and the defendant, and there happened to only be one witness there at the time, right? So in this case, you can't use the Torah won't allow one witness testimony to be sufficient in order to lead to the defendant having to pay money to the plaintiff. However, the Beit Din can come to the defendant and say, look, we have the testimony of one witness who says that you did this, and it's backing up the plaintiff's argument. So now, if you don't want to pay up, you have to take an oath in order to deny the testimony of this one witness. Chapter 7 continues with additional cases that in which one person takes an oath in a way that forces another person to make a payment. So, for instance, if a person took an oath that he worked for me and I didn't pay him his due, or he takes an oath that I damaged him in some way and didn't pay for those damages. Or if a person takes an oath that in some way I owe him payment, then the Beit Din can make me pay that person based on his oath. However, in certain cases, we might be very suspicious of Shvuat Shav, right? Of false oaths. And so there's a discussion here of when do we not, what kind of people will we automatically not listen to their oaths? For instance, people who are psulim le'edut, people who we don't consider their testimony kosher. people who are known as a gazlan, as a thief, etc. That's chapter 7. Chapter 8 moves to the final category of Shevuot HaShomrim, cases in which the four different categories of Shomrim, which have already been discussed extensively in Masechet Baba Metzia, Shomer Sachar, Shomer Chinam, Shoel, Vesocher. Not sure how to translate those. Someone who is a guardian or a warden for payment, one who does it for free, one who borrows an object, and one who rents an object. In all of these four cases, what happens if they took an oath that, right, if something that they were watching was damaged in some way or stolen, and they take an oath that it wasn't their responsibility, and then it turns out in retrospect that they were lying, when do we know that they're מתחייבים, that they need to bring a korban, and what do they need to do in order to receive atonement? And this is just sort of to round out the picture, but the truth is that this discussion has already been discussed in Masechet Baba Metzia, and therefore both the Mishnah and the Talmud are very, very short here in this chapter. Two final comments about Masechet Shevuot in general. First of all, we can see what significance Chazal attribute to a person's speech in general, and specifically to taking an oath in the name of God. The severe prohibition on taking God's name in vain even appears in Aseret HaDibrot, appears, quite at the beginning, right after the prohibition on Avodah Zarah. And Chazal really emphasize the status, the important status that a Shevuah has. There's a very, very lengthy Braita on page 39a of the Masechet, where the Masechet describes, the Braita describes how the judges turn to someone about to take an oath, and they say to him, "Be aware that the entire world trembled when the Holy One, blessed be He, said at Mount Sinai, 'You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. For the Lord will not hold guiltless one who takes His name in vain.'" Ki lo yenakeh, that's the term that's used there. So first of all, be aware how severe taking an oath is, okay? That the entire world trembled at the very idea that someone could take the name of God in vain. And then the Braita goes on to compare between all other transgressions in the Torah and taking a false oath. Be aware that with regard to all the other transgressions in the Torah, it's stated v'nakeh, and will clear the guilty. Whereas here, with regard to taking a false oath, it is stated will not hold guiltless, lo yenakeh, right? In the verse about taking the name of God in vain. And be aware that with regard to all the other transgressions in the Torah, punishment is exacted only from the transgressor, whereas here punishment is exacted from him and from his family. As it is stated, do not allow your mouth to bring your flesh into guilt. And one's flesh is nothing other than his relative, as it is stated, and that you not hide yourself from your own flesh. And be aware that with regard to all the other transgressions in the Torah, punishment is exacted only from the transgressor, whereas here, punishment is exacted from him and from the entire world. And there's a midrash here on a verse from Hosea, where the verse says, "Swearing and lying and murdering and stealing, committing adultery, break all bounds. Therefore, the land mourns, and everyone who dwells therein languishes," right? So for swearing and lying, not only the transgressor is punished, but the whole world. And it goes on this way at length, as you can see here in this very, very long Braita. We won't read all of it. But what I want to emphasize is how much the Braita is emphasizing the significance and the world-shaking power of taking God's name in vain in an oath. But that really raises the question, if an oath is so severe, so it's one thing if a person takes an oath upon themselves voluntarily, but how is it that most of the Masechet actually deals with imposing an oath on a person against their wish, right? When a person doesn't want to take an oath, but they're being told either by a third party or by the Bet Din that they have to take an oath for the benefit of someone else. How is it that that we can allow something like this at all? And I think the Braita actually kind of tries to answer that question in the continuation of the Braita when they say here, where I'm marking it over here, when the judges administer the oath to him, they say to him, be aware that we administer an oath to you, not according to your understanding of the oath, but according to the understanding of the omnipresent and according to the understanding of the court. And this is as we have found with regard to Moshe Rabbeinu, that when he administered an oath to the Jewish people in the plains of Moab so that they would accept the Torah upon themselves, he said to them, know that it is not according to your understanding that I administer an oath to you, but according to the understanding of the omnipresent and according to my understanding. As it is stated, neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but the next verse, but he who stands with us this day, and also one who is not with us this day. So this Braita is actually suggesting that the model of Shevuot Dayanim, that's the context here, is the covenant at Sinai, which created an obligation also for future generations, right? Just as Moshe actually made all of Israel take an oath that they're taking upon themselves the obligation to perform mitzvot, and not only those who were standing there, but actually future generations as well were, it's as though they already took the oath to perform these mitzvot. And it's as though they also accepted the authority of future generations of rabbis to create new mitzvot. Um, and they, in that way, they also they accepted the authority of the judges to make people take an oath, even if they don't want to. Okay, so the idea of oath really goes back to very foundational ideas of what are the mitzvot? How do the mitzvot obligate us who were not at Mount Sinai? How is it that we're also bound by them? And the idea of oaths, of a person being able to take an oath upon himself, the idea of someone else being able to impose an oath on me, returns to these ideas of coercion as a fundamental idea of the mitzvot. And in this context, I want to just point out that it seems that Chachamim themselves are aware of the radical nature of this idea of the oath. Because when we look at the very first Mishnah that discusses oaths in the Masechet, which is the first Mishnah of chapter 3, we can see here that the rabbis are having an argument. Rabbi Akiva says, if I swear that I shall not eat, the person who swore that he won't eat and then he ate even a minute quantity, he's liable. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. But the sages object and they said to him, where do we find that he who eats a minute quantity is liable, that this one should be liable, right? Give me one other case according to Torah law that that even if you eat a kol shehu, a minute amount, you're going to be liable. What's the parallel to this? Where did you bring this idea from? Rabbi Akiva answers them like a good Jew with another question, a rhetorical question. And he says, where do we find that one who merely speaks bring a sacrifice, that this one should bring a sacrifice, right? You're talking to me about a very specific law of that even if I ate a minute amount, I'll be liable. But what about the bigger category? Where else do you find a parallel in general to the idea of a shvu'ah, that a person who just by speaking something, he's going to create a prohibition that then if he transgresses that prohibition, he's going to have to bring a sacrifice. That's really the fundamental idea of the Shvuah, and that's a much even more radical idea, right? And the Chachamim don't answer here. So it's a kind of dialogue which shows how the rabbis themselves are kind of becoming aware of the radical nature of a Shvuah, where a person can actually create a completely new prohibition which didn't exist before, and in that way is creating a new mitzvah that's similar to the covenant that was created at Mount Sinai, right? That just as that covenant created a situation that a person is mushba ve'omed mehar Sinai, that a person is, it's as though they've taken an oath to perform certain mitzvot. A person on an individual level can create a new kind of system like that that emulates that grander system of the mitzvot. So as you can see, this is going to take us, Masechet Shevuot is going to take us to many very philosophical and grand ideas about the philosophy of language, the nature of language, how language creates obligations and prohibitions. It takes us back to very fundamental categories of the mitzvot and theological questions about how is it possible that a person will act in this way. And in addition, of course, many fascinating legal questions about the different kinds of oaths, the differences between them, and how each of these systems is kind of a mini system that functions in and of itself, and what are its own rules. Good luck with the Masechet.